Halo Infinite's third flight was this past weekend, which not only brought possibly the last flight before launch, which also allowed us to play more arena and check out the improved big team battle. I got to play a decent amount of it this weekend, and in this video we're going to go over all my thoughts for this flight from the past weekend, talk about BTB, some additional thoughts that I have about arena, a little bit about the weapon sandbox, and basically kind of formulate my final thoughts for these flights, and possibly my final thoughts for Halo Infinite going all the way into launch if we don't get another flight. So let's hop right in. So first things first, like I always like to do, I'm just give you guys super high level thoughts on the flight. This one was really good. I really enjoyed how a lot more people got in, and the performance this time was actually pretty much what you'd expect it to be from a AAA game. I was getting basically 144 frames, and I'm sure there will still be more optimization between now and launch. That said, there were still some crashing issues and everything like that, but obviously this was still a flight build, so that's kind of to be expected. Like I mentioned in the intro, this could be the last flight we get before launch, which is kind of a bummer since, you know, launch is 2 months away and I want to play more Halo Infinite, but the content that was in the flight, I definitely got my fill of it. Only having those 5 maps and that smaller selection of game modes and the sandbox in general, there was only so much of it you could play without really burning yourself out, and so I do think over the past 2 weekends, I did get my fill of the content that was given to us. I really enjoyed it and I had a good time, but if they were to extend those exact flights into future weekends, I would be starting to look for more content, which isn't a bad thing or anything like that, but just me saying I got my fill of the flights. I had a really good time, and I'm really looking forward to the actual launch of the game when we finally get to get our hands on absolutely everything. Another thing before we kind of hop into specifics is I'm not going to touch on the leaks. There's been a whole bunch of them again, and sometimes it's kind of hard to decipher which ones are worth talking about, which ones aren't, who doesn't want leaks, who wants leaks, so I'm going to kind of avoid them and just purely talk about the content that was given to us this past weekend and a little bit about the weekend before. With that said, let's talk about Big Team Battle, as this was the first time that we got to play Halo Infinite's Big Team Battle. Overall, I really enjoyed it. Although, like I was saying, playing one map did get a little bit old when you played it over and over and over for an entire weekend. I am very excited to play more Big Team Battle when the game comes out, even though admittedly I am more of an arena player when it comes to multiplayer in Halo. Now that said, Big Team Battle wasn't perfect, and I kind of want to talk about some of my nitpicks. One thing that I didn't really like in Big Team Battle was the radar range was really short, with fragmentation being a larger and bigger map. It felt like in a lot of cases the radar was almost useless with the really short range that it had. There's also the new loot cave mechanic, which while cool, I felt was a little bit underwhelming. When you opened it, there'd usually be an active camo or an overshield, some type of power weapon, and then an equipment and some other random stuff. But I think it would actually be a lot more cool if the loot cave was really more cool and unique. Maybe have some fancy weapons in there that you can't get on the map, or just other ways to kind of spice it up, because as it was now, I didn't find myself waiting for the loot cave that often because you ended up just getting an RNG weapon drop, and sometimes it wasn't even really that good of a weapon. By no means though was the loot cave detrimental to the game, so I don't know if it necessarily needs to be redone or reworked, but that's kind of just my opinion on the way it was in the flight. A big topic of conversation, especially in Big Team Battle, is assault rifle and sidekick starts. Going into the flight, I was really skeptical about this because I've been pretty vocal about not really liking AR sidekick starts, especially with the way that the AR and sidekick are balanced in this game, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now that said, it actually played a lot better than I thought it would. I'm still a little bummed that we couldn't at least try BR starts to see how it would play out, but fragmentation in particular was absolutely littered with BR and commando spawns, so it wasn't really hard to find a precision weapon off spawn if you needed one. There were still situations where you would have to go into combat with the AR and the sidekick, but if you kind of remembered where those spawns were, usually you could find one pretty easily before getting into a fight. I'll talk a little bit more about the balance of the weapons kind of later on, but that's kind of just my opinion on the starts. Personally, I think actually BTB played better with AR sidekick starts than I thought it would. However, I do think Arena could still benefit from at least testing out BR starts. Now moving on to the vehicles, these are both cool and underwhelming at the same time. Halo Infinite has that new system where as the game goes on, the vehicles are supposed to kind of scale up and you're supposed to get the cool heavy vehicles toward the end of the game. One problem was that those heavy vehicles were starting to spawn in way too late. tons of my games ended without anything other than a ghost coming from the Pelican, and that's a huge bummer. Over the entire flight, I didn't get to drive a single Wasp, a single Scorpion, and I only got to drive the Banshee once, and I played during most of the playtimes. But this was just due to the fact that so many of my games ended before the heavy vehicles started spawning in, and then if they did spawn in, usually there was a good amount of people there trying to drive them when they spawned. I think this needs to be tweaked, especially for Slayer, to have those heavy vehicles start spawning in a little bit quicker. It should probably be score based instead of time based, at least in Slayer, because I'm pretty sure it was time driven. Other than that though, the vehicles seem fun. The Warthog actually performed a little bit better in Big Team Battle than I thought it would, though you do get melted pretty easily as there's a billion different ways to take out vehicles. The Ghost, similar to in 4v4 on Behemoth, seems stronger than the Warthog, which is kind of odd. And like I said, I didn't really get to drive too many of the heavy vehicles, but from the receiving end, they seem like they kind of did their job. But even then, I didn't really see that many of them to give you guys a solidified opinion. Moving on, we had 3 game modes in Big Team Battle: Slayer, Capture the Flag, and Total Control, which was the new game mode. Slayer and Capture the Flag, there isn't really a whole ton to talk about. They kind of functioned exactly like you thought they would. However, Total Control is Big Team Battle's kind of spin on a strongholds or a domination type game mode. In Total Control, you play to 3, and to score a point, you have to capture all 3 points on the map. This led to some really cool moments where you would try and capture all 3, but I found that sometimes, similar to CTF, these games could really drag on if there was a stalemate and a team couldn't get all 3 points. Other than that though, I did enjoy the mode. I found it pretty fun, and obviously I also enjoyed Slayer and Capture the Flag. We should also talk a little bit about fragmentation. The map itself was pretty cool. I did like it, though it ended up being a lot more segmented than I thought it would, and even though the map was pretty large in size and you are playing 12v12, it didn't seem like very often that scale really hits you other than in very select scenarios. This is probably a good thing though, as it'd probably get overwhelming if the map was more open, and like I said, overall the map is cool and I liked it. I'm really excited to see what other type of Big Team Battle maps we get once the game launches. Now, we talked a lot about Arena last weekend, but I just wanted to talk about it a little bit more as I did play more this weekend, just to kind of put my final thoughts on it. I mentioned AR sidekick starts earlier when we were talking about BTB. I think Arena could really benefit from BR starts, as Arena sidekick starts just to me aren't all that fun. However, there is a good chance we are playing social settings, and in that case I don't really mind it, but hopefully for comp we get BR starts, or at the very least, and hopefully this happens even in social, they put more precision weapon spawns on the map. I'm not a big fan of only having 2 on each of the maps, especially since sometimes you don't even get a BR in those weapon crates, you just get the commando, and those games can be a lot less fun than when you can actually get your hands on a BR. This kind of goes hand in hand with Bazaar, as Bazaar is probably my least favorite map, with obviously only those 2 precision weapons, but also just the mid area of the map and how often the gameplay kind of reduces to teams on either side shooting at each other, but you're shooting at each other with ARs and sidekicks, which don't really have the optimal range to actually be able to kill people at that range. So it ends up being this weird kind of gameplay experience where you're kind of waiting for the precision spawn, but there's only one, and you might not even have the battle rifle. It might just be the commando. And so yeah, I don't know. Hopefully they look into maybe putting more precision weapons on these maps. I'm trying to think back to something like Halo 3 or some of those older games, and I think even when you would play AR Slayer in those games, there would usually be more than 2 battle rifles on the maps, but you guys can correct me in the comments below if I'm wrong. I know some maps had more BRs than others, but even when I play AR Slayer in Halo 3, I feel like you can usually get a BR, and that isn't really the case when you're playing Arena in Halo Infinite. Like I said, there's only going to be 1 precision weapon spawn on your side of the map, and it might not even be a battle rifle, it might be a commando. Speaking of that, with the dynamic weapon system, still not a huge fan. It's okay for social, but I really think comp needs to have dedicated weapon spawns, so I hope that's something maybe they clarify, or if we end up waiting to launch, I hope that they've made that decision for competitive. Lastly, I just wanted to talk about my final thoughts on some of the different weapons. I'm not going to go through all of them because we've talked about them a ton, and honestly, my opinion on a lot of the weapons didn't really change, but here's kind of the ones that I have kind of more final thoughts on. I think the assault rifle actually isn't as strong as everyone's saying, though I do think it needs a slight nerf in range, as you can really use it as a mid-range weapon, and I don't think the assault rifle should be that effective at that range. I think this is also compounded by the fact that the assault rifle does not have D-scope, while the precision weapons that you're fighting do. So if you take on a fight with someone that has a commando or a battle rifle, you can actually D-scope them while you can stay in the smart scope and continue to put shots on them. This is less of an issue if they're using a battle rifle because you can hip fire that pretty easily, even at mid-range, but if you get D-scoped when you're using the commando, I do feel that puts you at a pretty big disadvantage even when you're fighting an assault rifle at a further range. range. To piggyback off that, I actually don't really like the commando. I think pretty much in all scenarios, I'd rather have a battle rifle. Don't get me wrong, if I'm playing big team battle and the commando spawns the one I run past, I'll still pick it up, but to me it's kind of a slightly lower tier than the battle rifle. I think part of this is the bloom. Not a big fan of bloom on any of the weapons, but also the commando can just be kind of difficult to use once they get closer, but even at further ranges, it's not super accurate or amazing like the battle rifle is, which can absolutely laser people at longer distances. That said, I did see a lot of people talking about how the battle rifle maybe needs nerfs. I think it's fine. It does laser people, but currently we don't even spawn with it. So maybe if we end up getting BR starts, they could look into some balancing, but I'm really not sure where you take the balancing. You could do projectiles a la Halo 3 and maybe have that kind of kick in at further ranges. So it only really happens maybe in big team battle or when you're taking further gunfights in arena, or you could give it recoil. But if it's anything like the recoil in Halo 5, I'm going to take a hard pass. And the last thing I would ever want to see is BR on the bloom. So I'm skeptical to call for BR nerfs because I'm kind of worried about what they could do to nerf the battle rifle. Next up is the sidekick. I actually think the sidekick is also in a pretty good spot, but I do think it needs a reduction in bloom. One of my biggest issues with the sidekick is if you can accurately hit your shots, it can absolutely melt someone and you can outdamage someone that is using an assault rifle even at close to mid-range. The problem comes in, can you effectively actually hit those shots? And when you're in a gunfight and you don't have time to pace your shots, that really does all come down to bloom. Or even if you're taking a gunfight correctly and you are pacing your shots, if you're fighting someone that has a sidekick and they're not pacing their shots, there's still a chance that they get lucky with the RNG of the bloom and win the gunfight anyways, and I absolutely hate that that can happen, and it's one of my biggest issues with how gunplay was in Halo Reach. So hopefully we see a reduction in bloom and the sidekick, or just get rid of bloom altogether because I hate it. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the sidekick. Next up, in my other videos, I kind of talked about how I thought the bulldog and the heat wave were really weak. I've actually kind of grown more fond of the bulldog. Once you stop using it like the traditional Halo shotgun where you get right on top of people and you try and one-shot them, and you use it more of a spammy mid to close-ish range shotgun, I actually think it can be pretty effective, though currently it is kind of held down by the BXB of the assault rifle, because why use the bulldog when you could just run up and BXB someone with the assault rifle out? However, that won't be there at the launch of the game, at least I think, so I think the bulldog actually could be in a decent place once the game launches. The heat wave, on the other hand, I'm not really a fan of. I kind of find it inconsistent, and I don't really find its special properties like being able to bounce bullets all that effective. The horizontal shot doesn't do very much damage, and the vertical shot is kind of inconsistent and hard to use. I think maybe the heat wave could use some tuning. Next up, I want to talk about the sniper rifle. A lot of people were originally complaining that the sniper rifle was too hard to use, but as I've used it more, I'm starting to really grow fond of how difficult the sniper is to use in this game, as I think it'll be a lot better of a gameplay experience than something like Halo 5 or Halo 4, where it was extremely easy to snipe in those games. I think this is going to make it so if you want to be an effective sniper in Halo Infinite, you have to be truly good with the weapon, and there will be a lot more of a skill cap for sniping in Halo Infinite, which will be pretty cool. And lastly, I just want to say that the Ravager is one of my favorite weapons, although I don't really use it as much in big team battle as I do in arena, but it's really fun. The regular burst fire shot is really effective at putting damage on people or even finishing low people off, and the area denial ability with the flyer on the floor is kind of cool, but I don't really use it all that often. And that's kind of all my thoughts on this Halo Infinite flight. I really enjoyed BTB, I really enjoyed the flight, and I'm just excited to get to play more Halo Infinite in December. Really, my only worry now is, do we have enough content at the launch of the game? I've been really enjoying the gameplay, and while I'm not a big fan of the progression system, it's not enough of an issue that it'll push me off of the game, as long as we have enough fun content to kind of keep me engaged and keep me having a good time. Let me know in the comments how you felt about Big Team Battle and how you felt about the flight in general. And other than that, follow me over on Twitch, where I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. You can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram. And with that said, I'll see you all next time.